There is a terrifying reality hidden in the spiritual realm. When you strike a faithful child of God, you are not fighting a mere human. You are declaring war on the Almighty Himself. History is filled with the ruins of powerful men who realized too late that the quiet, humble person they targeted was protected by a force they could not comprehend. This is the story of what happens when the wicked touch the anointed. In the sprawling, sun-drenched valley of Ethelgard, there lived a man named Adrian. To the naked eye, Adrian was nothing remarkable. He was not a prince, nor a warrior, nor a wealthy merchant. He was a simple stonemason, a man who spent his days with a chisel and hammer shaping rocks for the walls of his neighbors and the wells of the village. But Adrian possessed something that money could not buy, and power could not command the tangible, heavy favor of God. It was a quiet sort of favor. When a drought swept through Ethelgard, turning the green hills into brown dust, Adrian's small garden remained lush, his fig trees heavy with fruit. When sickness crept through the valley like a thief in the night, it seemed to skip over Adrian's doorstep. He spoke little, but when he did, his words carried a weight that settled deep in the chests of those who heard them. He walked with a peace that passed all understanding, a serenity that seemed to irritate the chaotic souls of those around him. And no one was more irritated than Governor Kevin. Kevin was a man of the world. He had clawed his way up from the gutter, lying, cheating, and bribing his way into the governorship. He owned the largest vineyards, the fastest horses, and the loyalty of the local magistrate. He believed that power was the only god worth serving, and fear was the only currency that mattered. Kevin first noticed Adrian during the Festival of the Harvest. The governor was riding his white stallion through the market, his chest puffed out, expecting the usual bows and trembling reverence from the peasantry. The crowd parted like the Red Sea eyes cast down all except one. Adrian stood by his cart of stones, wiping dust from his hands. He looked up at Kevin, not with defiance, but with a calm, pitying gaze. He nodded respectfully, but he did not bow in fear. That look haunted Kevin. It gnawed at him. In Adrian's eyes, Kevin saw a reflection of his own emptiness. He saw a man who feared God so deeply that he had no fear left for men. "Who is that?" Kevin snapped at his advisor, a weaselly man named Marcus. "That is just Adrian, my lord." Marcus replied nervously, adjusting his robe. "A mason, a nobody. Though the people say he is holy, they say he walks with God." Kevin sneered. "Walks with God? Let us see if his God walks with him when the ground beneath him begins to shake." The obsession began small. Kevin raised the taxes on Adrian's small plot of land, triple the rate of his neighbors. He expected Adrian to come begging, to scream, to throw a rock through the governor's window. Instead, Adrian worked harder. He chiseled more stone, he sold more wares, and he paid the tax without a murmur. Remarkably, the very next week, a wealthy traveler from the coast passed through and, admiring Adrian's work, bought his entire stock for double the price. Adrian had more money after the tax than he did before. Kevin was furious. The blessing on Adrian's life felt like a personal insult to Kevin's power. "He mocks me." Kevin paced his marble floors, wine goblet in hand. "He mocks me with his silence. I will not have a peasant thinking he is untouchable." Marcus, sensing his master's dark mood, stepped forward. "My lord, if you strike him openly, the people may riot. They love him. But if we destroy his character, if we make him look like a thief, then God will surely abandon him, and the people will turn on him." A cruel smile spread across Kevin's face. Yes. Strip him of his name, and you strip him of his power. The plan was enacted under the cover of a moonless night. Kevin orchestrated a scandal that would ruin any man. He had Marcus plant the governor's own golden signet ring, a priceless artifact, inside a sack of grain in Adrian's workshop. The next morning, the town guards, acting on an anonymous tip, raided the stonemason's home. They overturned his tables, smashed his pottery, and terrified his wife. When the captain of the guard pulled the golden ring from the sack, a gasp went through the crowd that had gathered. "Thief!" the captain shouted, striking Adrian across the face. "You steal from the governor himself!" Adrian stood with a bruised cheek, blood trickling from his lip. He did not scream. He did not curse. He looked at the ring, then at the captain, and finally he looked toward the governor's palace on the hill. "I have stolen nothing," Adrian said, his voice steady as a heartbeat. "The truth is a lion. You do not have to defend it. Let it loose, and it will defend itself." He was dragged away in chains, thrown into the deepest, dampest cell beneath the palace. That evening, Kevin threw a feast to celebrate his victory. He felt a rush of adrenaline. He had crushed the man of God. He had proven that his power was absolute. The wine flowed, the music played, and Kevin laughed loudly, recounting the look on the mason's face. But as the midnight hour approached, the festivities were interrupted. The heavy oak doors of the banquet hall groaned open. Standing there was not a guard nor a guest, but an old woman known only as Widow Martha. She was the village elder, a woman who spent her days in prayer at the temple. She was blind in one eye, and she leaned heavily on a gnarled staff. The music died down. The guard stepped forward to remove her, but Kevin raised a hand. He was drunk on arrogance and wanted to humiliate her too. "Let her speak," Kevin slurred. "The old crone has come to beg for the mason." Martha hobbled forward, her wooden staff clicking against the marble floor. She stopped 10 pesos from the high table. She did not bow. "Governor Kevin." Her voice was surprisingly strong, scraping through the silence like a jagged stone. "I have not come to beg. I have come to warn." Kevin laughed, and his courtiers mimicked him. "Warn me, you." "You have touched a chosen vessel," Martha said. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "There are men you can fight, Kevin. You can fight the strong, for they rely on their muscles. You can fight the rich, for they rely on their gold. But woe to the man who fights the helpless one, who relies only on God." She raised a shaking finger, pointing it directly at his heart. "You believe you have put a man in a cage," she whispered, yet everyone heard it. "But you have actually locked yourself in a cage with a lion. Release him. Repent, or the roof of this house will become your tomb." Kevin's face turned purple with rage. He stood up, knocking his goblet over. Red wine spilled across the white tablecloth like blood. "Get this witch out of my sight," he roared. "And as for the mason, tomorrow at high noon he receives 40 lashes in the public square. I will show you what I do to your chosen ones." Martha was dragged away, but as she left, she did not struggle. She only shouted one last thing. "He that diggeth a pit shall fall into it, and whoso breaketh an hedge, a serpent shall bite him." Kevin sat back down, his chest heaving. "Play the music," he commanded, but the musicians played out of tune. The food suddenly tasted like ash in his mouth. The laughter of his guests sounded shrill and hollow. That night, for the first time in years, Kevin could not sleep. He lay in his silk sheets, staring at the ceiling. The silence of the palace was heavy, oppressive. Then he heard it. It started as a scratching sound inside the walls. Scritch, scratch, scritch. It grew louder. It sounded like thousands of tiny claws skittering across stone. Kevin sat up, his heart hammering. "Guards!" he shouted. No one answered. Suddenly the window shutters slammed open with a violent bang, though there was no wind outside. The candles in his room flickered and died, plunging him into total darkness. In the dark, Kevin felt a presence. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a Motta. It was something far more terrifying. It was the sensation of protection being removed. It felt as though the roof had been ripped off his life, exposing him to a cosmic storm. He tried to shout again, but his throat seized up. His tongue felt swollen heavy like lead. He clawed at his neck, gasping for air. Down in the dungeon, Adrian sat on the cold stone floor. He was not weeping. He was singing. Softly under his breath, he sang a hymn of trust. And as he sang, the rats that usually bit the prisoners stayed in the corners, watching him with docile eyes. The guard on duty, a brute named Thomas, found himself weeping silently, unable to explain why the presence of this prisoner made him feel such conviction for his past sins. While Adrian worshipped in the dark, Kevin writhed in the luxury of his chambers. The next morning, the sun rose over Ethelgard, but a shadow hung over the governor's house. When the servants entered Kevin's room, they found him huddled in the corner, his eyes wide and bloodshot, his fine clothes torn. "My lord," Marcus asked, stepping in, "it is time for the lashing." Kevin looked up. He should have been humbled. He should have remembered Martha's warning. But the human heart is deceptively wicked. The fear of the night had vanished with the morning sun replaced by a cold, hard pride. He convinced himself it was just a nightmare, a bad reaction to the wine. "Yes," Kevin croaked, his voice raspy. "Bring the mason out. Today we break him." Kevin stood up, brushing off his robes. He did not know it yet, but he had just crossed the line of no return. He had ignored the warning. He had hardened his heart. The consequences were no longer approaching. They were here, and they would not stop at nightmares. The town square of Ethelgard was packed shoulder to shoulder. The sun was at its zenith, a blinding white disk in a cloudless sky. The heat was oppressive, heavy with humidity and the smell of dust. In the center of the square stood a wooden platform, and tied to the whipping post was Adrian. His shirt had been stripped from his back. He looked small against the rough wood, his ribs showing through his skin. Yet even bound, he did not look like a victim. His head was bowed in prayer, his lips moving silently. Governor Kevin sat on a velvet-cushioned chair atop a raised dais shielded by a silk canopy. He held a chalice of wine, his hand trembling slightly, a remnant of the night's terror that he refused to acknowledge. "Citizens of Ethelgard," Kevin bellowed, his voice cracking slightly before finding its strength. "We are a city of law. We do not tolerate thieves, no matter how holy they claim to be. Let this be a lesson to anyone who thinks they are above the governor's justice." He signaled the executioner, a towering man in a black hood, holding a whip made of braided leather and metal shards. 40 lashes, Kevin commanded. "Make them count." The executioner stepped back, winding his arm for the first strike. The crowd held its breath. A woman in the front row turned her face away, weeping. Adrian squeezed his eyes shut. "Father," he whispered, "forgive them." The executioner's arm snapped forward. Crack! But the sound did not come from the whip hitting flesh. It came from the earth. At the exact moment, the whip was meant to tear into Adrian's skin. A sound like a cannon blast erupted from beneath the governor's dais. The ground lurched violently. The executioner lost his footing, the whip flailing harmlessly through the air, wrapping around the wooden post instead of the man. Horses screamed. The crowd panicked, surging backward. Kevin grabbed the armrests of his chair as the world tilted. "Earthquake!" screamed Marcus. "Protect the governor!" But this was no ordinary earthquake. It did not shake the whole valley. The tremors were localized, focused with surgical precision, directly under the seat of power. As Kevin tried to stand a messenger on a foam-flecked horse, tore through the panic, riding straight into the square, disregarding all protocol, he fell from his horse, gasping for breath, his face pale with shock. "Governor, governor," the messenger shrieked, pointing back toward the hills. "What is it?" Kevin roared, trying to maintain composure as the ground stilled beneath him. "Speak, you fool." "The vineyards," the messenger wailed. "The great estate, it is gone." Kevin froze. His vineyards were his pride, his fortune, the source of his political bribery. "What do you mean, gone? A fire?" "No, my lord," the messenger sobbed, clawing at the dirt. "The earth, it opened its mouth. A sinkhole, my lord. The main house, the wine cellars, the stables, swallowed whole. 1 minute they were there, and the next, nothing but a pit. The earth swallowed your fortune, my lord, but stopped right at the fence of the mason's garden next door." A hush fell over the crowd, so profound that the wind could be heard whistling through the eaves. The people turned their eyes from the messenger to Kevin, and then to Adrian, who was still tied to the post unharmed. The mason's garden bordered the governor's vast estate. The disaster had consumed the oppressor's wealth, but had not touched a single blade of grass belonging to the oppressed. Kevin's face went white. The blood drained from his extremities. He felt that presence again, the terrifying, heavy presence from his bedroom the night before. "Lies," Kevin screamed, though his voice sounded thin. "This is a trick. Whip him," I said. "Whip him." He pointed a shaking finger at Adrian. "Strike him now." The executioner looked at the whip, then at the governor, and dropped the weapon as if it were burning hot. "I will not," the man rumbled, stepping back. "I fear no man, governor, but I fear the god of this mason." "Mutiny," Kevin shrieked, standing up, his face purple with rage. "I will have your head. I will have all your heads. I am Kevin. I am the law. I am." The sentence was never finished, as he stood there raging against the heavens. Kevin suddenly gasped. His hand flew to his chest, his mouth opened, but no sound came out. His face twisted into a mask of grotesque confusion. One side of his body went slack, dropping like a puppet whose strings had been cut. He collapsed onto the dais, rolling down the steps and landing face first in the dust at the feet of the crowd. He tried to rise, to shout, to command, but all that came from his lips was a garbled, incoherent moaning. The terrifying consequence had arrived. The man who had used his voice to destroy the reputation of a righteous man had now lost the ability to speak entirely. The man who had used his wealth to oppress the poor had seen his wealth swallowed by the earth in a single heartbeat. Widow Martha stepped out from the crowd. She walked past the trembling guards, past the fallen governor, and up to the whipping post. With a small knife from her belt, she cut Adrian's bonds. "The Lord has fought for you," she whispered to him. "Hold your peace." Adrian rubbed his wrists. He did not look at the crowd with triumph. He walked down the steps and knelt beside Kevin, who was writhed in the dirt, drooling and terrified. The crowd shouted, "Kick him! Spit on him! He tried to kill you!" Adrian raised a hand, silencing them. He took his own outer shirt, which had been stripped from him, and gently placed it over the fallen governor to cover his shame. "Judgment belongs to God," Adrian said softly. "Mercy belongs to us." The fall of Governor Kevin was absolute. It wasn't just that he lost his health and his wealth. He lost the illusion of power. His advisor Marcus, seeing the wind change immediately, confessed to planting the ring. He threw himself at the magistrate's feet, desperate to avoid the curse of Kevin. Adrian was exonerated before the sun set that day. But the true horror of the situation was the slow unraveling of Kevin's life. He did not die immediately. He lived for another 10 years, confined to a small room in the back of a servant's house as his palace was seized by creditors. He spent those 10 years unable to speak, staring out a window. From that window, he had a clear view of the valley. He could see the spot where his vineyard used to be, now a jagged scar in the earth. And right next to it, he could see Adrian's land. He watched as Adrian prospered. He watched as Adrian's stone business grew into a quarry that supplied the entire region. He watched as Adrian built a new orphanage for the village using the profits from his work. He watched as the man he tried to crush became the pillar of the community, loved and honored by all. It is said that in those final years, Kevin's eyes were always filled with tears, not just tears of regret for what he had lost, but tears of terror. He had learned the lesson too late. He had realized that the universe is not a chaotic place where the strong eat the weak. He realized that there is a moral architect, a defender of the defenseless. The village of Ethelgard changed too. A holy fear settled over the people. They treated one another with a new fragility, a new respect. They realized that you never truly know who you are dealing with. That quiet woman in the market, that humble man sweeping the temple steps. They might be the apple of God's eye. Adrian lived to a ripe old age, his strength never fading. On his deathbed, his children and grandchildren gathered around him. "Grandfather," one of the young ones asked, "were you afraid that day when the whip was raised?" Adrian smiled, his eyes bright with that same irritating, beautiful peace. "I was," he admitted. "But then I remembered the promise. Touch not my anointed, and do my prophets no harm. You see, my child, we often think God is slow. We think he is not watching. But God is like a dam. The water of his justice rises slowly, silently behind the wall of his patience. The wicked mistake this silence for permission. But when the dam breaks, it breaks all at once." He took a breath, his voice growing serious. "Never seek revenge," Adrian whispered. "Revenge is a clumsy weapon. It cuts the hand that wields it. If someone wrongs you, step back. Step back and let God step in. For it is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. The story of Kevin and Adrian was passed down for generations in Ethelgard. It became a proverb in the region. When a powerful merchant would cheat a poor widow or a corrupt official would threaten a righteous man, the elders would lean in and whisper, "Be careful. Do not wake the lion. Remember the vineyard. Remember the silence of Kevin." For there is a spiritual law as real as gravity. The hedge that God builds around his children is made of thorns. If you walk past it, you are safe. But if you try to break through it, to harm the one inside you will not just be cut, you will be entangled. And the more you struggle against the chosen, the tighter the thorns become, until you are destroyed by the very trap you set for them. This story is a solemn reminder to us all. We must walk with humility. If you are being attacked today, take heart. Your battle belongs to the Lord, and his defense is far more terrifying than any weapon you could wield. And if you are tempted to use your power to hurt the innocent, beware. You never know who is backed by the armies of heaven. If this story touched your spirit, please click the like button and share it with someone who needs this encouragement. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story of biblical wisdom. God bless you.